A single vicious sound can shatter a life of luxury. For Evelyn Vance Sterling, that sound was the sharp crack of her husband's hand against her face, echoing through the sterile, silent halls of a hospital. She was pregnant, vulnerable, and married to Richard Sterling, a celebrated tech millionaire who demanded perfection. That slap was not just an act of violence, it was a declaration of war. What Richard didn't know was that Evelyn was not just his wife. She was the only daughter of Arthur Vance, a titan of industry, with an empire built on steel and strategy. This isn't just a story of revenge, it's the anatomy of a takedown. How did one man's unforgivable fury unleash a father's calculated wrath and bring a billion-dollar company to its knees in a public courtroom spectacle? The Sterling residence in the exclusive enclave of Atherton, California, was less a home and more a monument to modern success. It was a sprawling structure of glass steel and stark white concrete, designed by a famed Japanese architect to blur the lines between inside and out. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked meticulously manicured gardens where not a single blade of grass dared to grow out of place. It was a house that graced the covers of architectural magazines, a testament to the meteoric rise of its owner, Richard Sterling, founder and CEO of Sterling Innovations. Yet for his wife, Evelyn, it felt like living inside a beautiful, sterile museum exhibit. Evelyn traced the rim of her porcelain teacup, the warmth a small comfort, against the morning chill that always seemed to linger in the cavernous, open-plan living room. Richard sat opposite her at the 20-foot-long Italian marble table, not looking at her, but at the tablet propped up beside his plate of untouched avocado toast. His brow was furrowed in concentration, his thumb swiping impatiently through stock market data and company analytics. This was their morning ritual, a shared space occupied by two separate worlds. The quarterly projections for Aura are looking phenomenal, he announced to the room, not to her. Aura was his company's flagship product, a revolutionary smart home integration system. We're projecting a 17% beat on analyst expectations. The stock will soar. That's wonderful, Richard Evelyn said, her voice soft. She placed a hand over her gently swelling belly, a protective gesture that had become second nature over the past 5 months. The baby, their son, was the one thing in this cold house that felt entirely hers, a secret source of warmth and hope. Richard finally looked up, his gaze sharp and assessing. At 38, he was handsome in a severe, sculpted way. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jawline sharp, and his eyes, a piercing shade of grey, seemed to calculate and appraise everything they saw. He was a man entirely self-made, a fact he mentioned with relentless frequency. He'd clawed his way up from a working-class background in Ohio, fueled by a ferocious intelligence and a bottomless well of ambition. He saw the world as a series of problems to be solved, of assets to be acquired, of competitions to be won. He had acquired Evelyn Vance, the daughter of old-money industrialist Arthur Vance, with the same strategic precision he applied to a corporate takeover. Marrying her was his ultimate victory, the final seal of his arrival into the stratosphere of the elite. His eyes fell to her hand on her stomach. "Have you been doing the prenatal yoga routines I downloaded for you?" he asked, his tone less of a question and more of an audit. "Yes, every morning," she replied. "And the nutritionist-approved meal plan is on the fridge." "Good. I want him to have the best possible start. No compromises." He said "him" with a certainty that allowed for no other possibility. He'd already named the nursery renovation project, Project Air. The illusion of their perfect marriage was as carefully constructed as their home. To the outside world, they were a power couple, the brilliant tech visionary and his beautiful, elegant wife. They were photographed at charity galas, their smiles perfectly calibrated for the cameras. But behind the closed doors, Evelyn felt the constant crushing weight of Richard's control. It had started small suggestions about her wardrobe critiques of her friends, whom he deemed unambitious, a meticulously managed joint calendar that left no room for spontaneity. Over time, it had escalated. He monitored her credit card statements, questioning every purchase. He'd installed Aura in their home, and while he sold it to the world as a convenience, Evelyn knew it was also his surveillance network. He could adjust the lights, see who was at the door, and monitor the security feeds from his phone anywhere in the world. She was a bird in a gilded cage, and he held the smart access codes. Her father, Arthur Vance, had been skeptical of Richard from the beginning. Arthur was a man of a different era and a different class. His wealth was generational, built on steel logistics and shrewd long-term investments through his company, Vance Consolidated. He was quiet, observant, and possessed a spine forged in boardrooms where deals were sealed with a handshake, not a flashy press release. He saw a brittleness in Richard, a desperate hunger for validation that he found distasteful. "He doesn't love you," Evelyn, Arthur had told her gently before the wedding. "He's acquiring you. You're his most prized asset." Evelyn, blinded by Richard's charisma and the whirlwind romance he had so expertly orchestrated, had dismissed her father's concerns. She'd believed in the man who'd courted her with poetic emails and grand gestures, not the man who now checked her daily caloric intake on a shared app. "We have your 20-week anatomy scan today. At 2, Richard said, tapping his tablet to bring up their schedule. "My meeting with the board has been pushed to 4 so I can make it. Everything needs to be on schedule. Dr. Peterson at St. Jude's is the best I've made sure of it." Of course he had. Everything in their life was the best, the most exclusive, the most expensive. It was all part of the Sterling brand. "I'm looking forward to it," Evelyn said, trying to inject some genuine enthusiasm into her voice. "I just want to know he's healthy." Richard's gaze hardened for a fraction of a second. "He will be. He's a Sterling. There are no defects." The word defects hung in the air, cold and sharp. It was a word he used often when talking about business flaws in code weaknesses in a competitor's strategy. To hear it applied even hypothetically to their unborn child sent a shiver down Evelyn's spine. The warmth from her teacup had vanished. She looked out the vast window at the perfect, unblemished garden, and for the first time, the gilded cage felt terrifyingly small, its glass walls closing in around her. The trip to the hospital, which should have been a moment of shared joy, now felt like another performance review she was destined to fail. The private maternity wing of St. Jude's Medical Center was designed to soothe. The walls were painted in soft, calming tones of seafoam green, the lighting was dim, and the air smelled faintly of lavender. It was a sanctuary of quiet anticipation, a world away from the frantic energy of the hospital's main entrance. But for Evelyn, the hushed atmosphere only amplified the sound of her own anxious heartbeat. Richard walked beside her, his hand not in hers, but resting possessively on the small of her back, guiding her as if she were a fragile, valuable object. He nodded curtly at the nurses, his smile a thin, practiced veneer of civility that didn't reach his cold grey eyes. He was playing the part of the doting, expectant father, but his grip was a constant reminder of his control. Inside the ultrasound room, Dr. Peterson, a woman with kind eyes and a reassuring demeanor, greeted them warmly. "Evelyn, Richard, good to see you both. Ready to get a good look at the little guy." The procedure began, and the sterile room was filled with the rhythmic whooshing of their son's heartbeat. It was a powerful, steady sound, a tiny drumbeat of life that momentarily washed away Evelyn's anxiety. A black and white image flickered to life on the screen above them. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She could see a tiny, perfect profile, a clenched fist, the curve of a spine. A wave of overwhelming love washed over her, so potent it brought tears to her eyes. Richard, however, wasn't looking at the screen with wonder. He was watching it with the intensity of an engineer studying a blueprint, searching for flaws. Everything is developing within expected parameters, correct. All limbs are present and proportional. Cranial circumference is optimal. Everything looks wonderful. Richard, Dr. Peterson, said, her smile patient. He's a very active, healthy-looking baby. Now let's take a look at the heart. The doctor spent several long minutes maneuvering the transducer, her expression growing more focused. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Richard's fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the arm of his chair. Evelyn held her breath, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Finally, Dr. Peterson turned from the screen, her professional smile faltering slightly. "Well," she began carefully, "his heart is strong, and his structure is generally very good. However, I am seeing a small VSD, a ventricular septal defect." Richard's drumming stopped. "A what speak English, doctor?" "It's a small hole in the wall between the two lower chambers of the heart," she explained calmly. "It's actually one of the most common congenital heart conditions. In many cases, these small holes close on their own within the first year of life. We will simply need to monitor it with pediatric cardiology after he's born." Evelyn's mind raced, filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. A hole in his heart. Is he in danger? Will he need surgery? "It's very unlikely to be dangerous, Evelyn. The hole is small, and from what I can see, his blood flow is not significantly compromised. It's highly probable it will resolve itself with no intervention at all." "We just have to be watchful," Dr. Peterson reassured her. But Richard wasn't listening to the reassurance. He had fixated on 3 words: defect, condition, and hole. His face, which had been a mask of corporate calm, began to crumble. A dark flush crept up his neck. "A defect," he repeated, his voice dangerously low. "You're telling me he's defective?" "That's not the term I would use, Mr. Sterling, Doctor," Peterson said, her tone becoming more formal. "It's a common, manageable condition. Your son is, by all other measures, perfectly healthy." Richard stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is unacceptable. Is this genetic? Did this come from her?" He gestured at Evelyn with a dismissive flick of his hand, as if she were a faulty piece of equipment. Evelyn flinched the accusation, stinging more than any physical blow. "Richard, stop it." "No. I want to know. We pay for the best care, the best nutrition, the best of everything. There are supposed to be no mistakes, no imperfections." He was pacing now, a predator in a cage, his polished facade stripped away to reveal something raw and ugly beneath. Dr. Peterson stood her ground. "This has nothing to do with Evelyn's care for herself or the baby. These things simply happen sometimes. It is no one's fault." Richard ignored her. He turned his furious gaze on Evelyn, who was still lying on the examination table, vulnerable and exposed. "Did you do something? Did you eat something you weren't supposed to? Did you miss one of your supplement schedules?" "No, Richard, of course not," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You know I've been following everything perfectly." "Perfectly? Then explain this," he hissed, jabbing a finger toward the ultrasound screen. "This is a failure, a flaw in the product." The cruelty of his words, comparing their unborn son to a faulty product, finally snapped the last thread of Evelyn's composure. "He is not a product. He is our son, Richard. and he needs us to be calm and supportive, not this. They were in the hospital corridor now, Dr. Peterson having tactfully suggested they continue their discussion outside. Richard had practically dragged Evelyn from the room. The soothing seafoam green walls of the hallway felt mocking a stark contrast to the violent turmoil brewing within him. "Supportive you want me to be supportive of mediocrity, of imperfection," he snarled, backing her against the wall. His face was inches from hers, his eyes blazing with a narcissistic rage she had never seen up close. A young nurse pushing a cart paused at the far end of the hall, her eyes wide. "He is a baby, not a balance sheet," Evelyn cried, her voice rising with a strength born of desperation and a mother's instinct. "There is nothing wrong with him. It's a small thing the doctor said will likely fix itself." "I don't deal in likely, I deal in certainties," he roared. "My son was supposed to be perfect, an extension of my success. You have failed me, Evelyn." And then it happened. In a flash of unrestrained fury, he raised his hand. The sound of his palm connecting with her cheek was a sickening crack that silenced the entire hallway. It was sharp, loud, and utterly definitive. Evelyn's head snapped to the side, the impact stinging, shocking her into a moment of pure, white-hot silence. The physical pain was a dull throb compared to the profound, soul-shattering agony of the betrayal. It wasn't just a slap. It was the complete and utter demolition of the man she thought she had married. In his place stood a monster, his face contorted with a rage that was terrifying in its intensity. She raised a trembling hand to her cheek, her eyes wide with horror and disbelief. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw nothing of the charming, ambitious man she'd fallen for. She saw only a tyrant, a bully, a man so pathologically obsessed with control that he would strike his pregnant wife in a hospital corridor over a perceived imperfection in his unborn heir. The nurse at the end of the hall gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Richard seemed to notice her for the first time, and a flicker of awareness of panic crossed his features. He had just lost control in a public space. He had created a witness. He took a step back, his expression shifting rapidly from rage to a twisted semblance of regret. "Evelyn, I didn't mean the stress." But his words were meaningless noise. The spell was broken. The gilded cage had been shattered, its bars revealed to be nothing but cold, hard iron. In that moment of searing clarity, Evelyn Vance Sterling made a decision. She would not go back to that house. She would not raise her son perfect, or not in the shadow of this man. Without a word, she turned and walked away from him. Each step was deliberate, fueled by a nascent fury of her own. She walked past the shocked nurse, her chin held high, her hand protectively over her son. She didn't know where she was going, only that it was away from him. As she pushed through the doors of the maternity wing and into the main hospital, she pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking, but her purpose resolute. She scrolled to one contact and pressed the call button. A voice answered on the first ring, calm and steady. "Evelyn, is everything all right?" She took a shaky breath, the dam of her composure finally breaking. "Dad," she sobbed the single word, carrying the weight of years of unspoken fear and a single moment of unforgivable violence. "Dad, can you come and get me?" The Vance estate in Woodside was the antithesis of Richard's Atherton glass box. It was an old-world fortress of stone and ivy, nestled amongst acres of ancient redwood and oak trees. The property known as Oakwood had been in the Vance family for 3 generations. It exuded a sense of permanence, of quiet, unshakable strength. The long, winding driveway was a decompression chamber, leaving the frantic energy of Silicon Valley far behind. This was where Evelyn had grown up, and as the car passed through the imposing iron gates, she felt a profound sense of coming home, of seeking sanctuary. Arthur Vance was waiting for her on the grand stone steps of the main house. He was a tall, formidable man, in his late 60s, with a full head of silver hair and eyes the color of a winter sky. He wore a simple cashmere sweater and trousers, yet he commanded more presence than Richard ever could in his $1,000 bespoke suits. He watched the car approach his face, an unreadable mask, but Evelyn saw the storm gathering in his eyes. The moment she stepped out of the car, his arms were around her. He didn't speak, simply held her as the tremors she'd been suppressing finally racked her body. She buried her face in his shoulder, the familiar scent of cedar and old books filling her senses, and wept. She cried for her shattered marriage, for the fear she felt for her son, and for her own foolishness in ignoring her father's warnings. Arthur held her until the sobs subsided, his hand stroking her hair. He led her inside, past the dark wood paneling and the ancestral portraits that lined the grand hallway, and into his study. It was his command center, a room filled with leather-bound books, antique maps, and the quiet hum of power. A fire crackled in the massive stone hearth. He settled her into a deep leather armchair and poured her a glass of water, his movements calm and deliberate. Only when she was settled did he speak, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Tell me everything," he said, "and do not leave out a single detail." So she told him. She started with the morning, with Richard's cold obsession with projections and perfection. She recounted the tense atmosphere in the ultrasound room, the doctor's gentle explanation, and Richard's horrifying reaction. Her voice broke as she described his words. Defect. Flaw in the product. And then, her voice dropping to a whisper, she told him about the slap in the hallway, the sound of it, the sting of it, the absolute humiliation of it. She also told him about the nurse who had witnessed it all. Throughout her story, Arthur remained perfectly still, his hands steepled under his chin. He listened with an unnerving, predatory stillness. He didn't interrupt. He didn't exclaim, but Evelyn could feel the temperature in the room plummeting. The quiet, contained man she knew was gone, replaced by the ruthless titan of industry who had crushed competitors and orchestrated hostile takeovers. The formidable CEO of Vance Consolidated was now focused on a singular new target, Richard Sterling. When she finished, a long, heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Arthur rose from his desk and walked to the large window overlooking the gardens. For a moment, he just stared out at the ancient oaks, their branches like strong, protective arms. "The prenuptial agreement he had you sign is formidable," Arthur said, his back still to her. "His lawyers were very thorough. It protects his assets, his company, his stock options. It leaves you with a settlement that for him is the equivalent of pocket change." Evelyn's heart sank. She had known the prenup was ironclad. Richard had presented it as a simple necessity of modern wealth management. "I don't care about his money, Dad. I just want out. I want to be safe, and I want my son to be safe." Arthur turned from the window, and the look in his eyes was chilling. It was the look of a general planning a campaign. "Oh, we will get you out, and you and my grandson will be safe. But you misunderstand me, Evelyn. I am not concerned with his money. I am going to take something far more valuable from him. I am going to take his company. I am going to dismantle the very thing that defines him piece by piece until he is left with nothing but the public humiliation he deserves." The sheer audacity of the statement shocked her. But how Sterling Innovations is worth billions. He's a media darling. "Media darlings burn the brightest right before they flame out," Arthur said coldly. He built his empire on a perception of flawless, aggressive success. We are going to systematically tear that perception apart. He has committed 2 unforgivable sins tonight. First, he laid a hand on my daughter. Second, he did it in a place with witnesses. He has given us the one thing I needed, a righteous cause and a public stage. He crossed the room to his desk and picked up the phone, pressing an intercom button. "Helen, please get Jessica Thorne on the line. I need her at the estate within the hour." Jessica Thorne was the head of litigation for Vance Consolidated. She was a brilliant, razor-sharp attorney in her early 40s, known for her tenacity and her ability to find leverage where none seemed to exist. She was Arthur's weapon, and he was about to aim her directly at Richard Sterling. "What are you going to do?" Evelyn asked, a tremor of fear and awe in her voice. Arthur sat down opposite her, taking her hands in his. His grip was firm and reassuring. "First, Jessica will file for an emergency restraining order and initiate divorce proceedings. The grounds will be irreconcilable differences, citing domestic violence. The hospital incident and our key witness, the nurse, will be the cornerstone. This moves the battle into the public domain, immediately tarnishing his carefully crafted image." He continued, laying out his strategy with cold precision. "Second, I am going to call in some favors. Sterling Innovations has several major enterprise contracts. I happen to know the CEOs of 2 of their biggest clients personally. I will have a quiet word, express my familial concern about Richard's stability. A COO who is publicly accused of striking his pregnant wife is a volatile asset. It creates uncertainty. Boards of directors despise uncertainty. Third, he went on his eyes like chips of ice. We investigate. Richard's rise has been too fast, too perfect. Men like him, men obsessed with image, and who have a pathological fear of failure, often cut corners. They inflate numbers, they bend rules, they hide skeletons. We are going to hire the best forensic accounting firm in the country. We are not going to look for a needle in a haystack. We are going to burn the entire haystack down and see what metal is left in the ashes." Evelyn stared at her father, mesmerized by the sheer, calculated ferocity of his plan. This was a side of him she rarely saw, the side that had built and protected an empire for 40 years. It was terrifying, and it was the safest she had felt all day. He wasn't just planning a divorce, he was planning an obliteration. "He will fight back," Evelyn whispered. "He's ruthless." "Yes, he is." Arthur agreed, a flicker of something that looked like respect for a worthy adversary in his eyes. "He is a shark who smells blood in the water. But he has forgotten one thing." Arthur leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, guttural promise. "I am the water." The first salvo in Arthur Vance's war was fired less than 24 hours after Evelyn arrived at Oakwood. The news broke on a Tuesday morning, hitting the financial world like a thunderclap. It wasn't a press release or a corporate announcement, but a carefully leaked court filing that appeared on a prominent tech industry blog. Sterling Innovations CEO Richard Sterling served with restraining order, accused of domestic violence, by pregnant wife Evelyn Vance Sterling. The headline was explosive. The article detailed the filing, citing an incident at St. Jude's Medical Center. It was sparse on details, but heavy on implication. Within an hour, it was picked up by every major news outlet. Richard Sterling, the golden boy of Silicon Valley, the visionary who spoke at conferences about building a better future, was now facing accusations that were toxic to his brand. Richard's response was swift and arrogant. He released a statement through a high-priced crisis PR firm. "These are baseless and malicious allegations, timed to extract a larger settlement in a divorce I was already planning to initiate. It is a desperate and undignified move by a troubled woman and her family. I look forward to clearing my name and focusing on the continued innovation at my company. He thought it was a battle for money to be fought with lawyers and publicists. He had no idea it was a battle for his corporate survival. At the Vance estate, the study had been transformed into a war room. Jessica Thorne, a woman with sharp features and an even sharper mind, moved with an air of controlled urgency. She was flanked by a team of junior lawyers while Evelyn sat quietly by the fire, a witness to the deconstruction of her own life. "His statement is a mistake," Jessica said, tapping the screen of her laptop. "He's attacking Evelyn's character, calling her troubled. That opens the door for us to introduce evidence of his controlling behavior to counter his narrative. The monitoring of her expenses, the Aura system, logs his restrictive dietary plans for her. It all paints a picture." Arthur nodded, his eyes fixed on the chessboard he had set up near the window. "He's arrogant. He believes his own press. He sees this as a domestic squabble. He has no idea what's coming for his business." The second phase of Arthur's plan was already in motion. He made 2 phone calls. The first was to Walter Chen, the aging CEO of a massive logistics corporation, Comstock Freight, that had recently signed a $100 million contract to overhaul their systems with Sterling's Aura technology. The second was to the board of directors of a major retail chain, an early and significant investor in Sterling Innovations. Arthur didn't make threats. He didn't need to. He simply expressed his profound personal disappointment and concern over the leadership stability at Sterling Innovations. He spoke of risk of brand association, of fiduciary duty to shareholders. He planted seeds of doubt, watered them with his immense credibility, and then hung up the phone. The effect was not immediate, but it was insidious. Whispers started in boardrooms. Analysts began asking cautious questions on earnings calls. The stock of Sterling Innovations, which had been on a relentless upward trajectory, wobbled. It dropped 2%, then 3%. It was a small dip, but it was the first sign of blood in the water. Meanwhile, the third and most crucial phase of the attack was underway. Arthur had hired Kroll, the world's premier corporate investigations and risk consulting firm. A team of forensic accountants, former FBI agents, and data analysts descended on the case. They were given a simple directive: find the rot. Their first target was the prenuptial agreement. Jessica's team read and reread the 100-page document, searching for any weakness. It was, as Arthur had noted, a fortress. It had been designed by a team of the most ruthless lawyers in the country. It explicitly shielded all of Richard's assets, his company stock, and any appreciation in their value during the marriage. "It's brutal," Jessica admitted to Arthur one evening. "He has a clause in here that waives Evelyn's rights to any community property derived from his business efforts. Legally, she's entitled to almost nothing beyond the stipulated settlement." He saw her as a temporary accessory from day one. Evelyn, overhearing this, felt a fresh wave of humiliation. It wasn't the money she cared about, but the cold, premeditated nature of it all. It proved her father right. She had been an acquisition. "Forget the prenup for now," Arthur commanded. "It's a distraction. Look at the company. Look at his financials. A man who lies to his wife is a man who lies to his shareholders." The Kroll team began a deep dive into Sterling Innovations' public filings. For weeks they found nothing. The company's growth seemed spectacular but legitimate. Their revenues, their user acquisition, costs, their profit margins, it all seemed to be in order. Richard's lawyers were stonewalling their requests for discovery in the divorce case, using the prenup as a shield to claim his business financials were irrelevant to the proceedings. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. It wasn't in a balance sheet or an SEC filing. It came from a disgruntled former employee. The investigators, casting a wide net, had been interviewing people who had left Sterling Innovations over the past 2 years. Most were bound by strict non-disclosure agreements, but one, a mid-level software engineer who had been fired 6 months prior, was bitter enough to talk. He told them about a project codenamed Project Daedalus. He explained that Sterling Innovations was preparing to launch a new line of enterprise-level security hardware. The market anticipation for this product was immense and was a major factor in the company's soaring stock valuation. He claimed that Richard had been promising investors and clients a launch date that was wildly optimistic. The hardware, the engineer alleged, was riddled with bugs and critical security vulnerabilities. Richard knew this, but he was pushing forward anyway, planning to fix the issues with software patches after the launch. He was cooking the roadmap, not the books, the Kroll team leader reported to Arthur and Jessica. He's selling a future he knows he can't deliver on time. He's deliberately misleading investors and the market about the readiness of his next big product to keep the stock price inflated. It was a crack in the armor. It wasn't fraud, not yet, but it was a clear case of deception. "This gives us leverage," Jessica said, her eyes gleaming. "We can use this in the divorce proceedings. We can argue that his true financial picture is not what it seems, that he has inflated the value of his assets through deceptive practices. It might be enough to convince a judge to look past the prenup and allow wider discovery." Just as this new front was opening up, Richard made another arrogant mistake. He agreed to a live television interview on a major financial news network to address the baseless rumors and project an image of strength. On screen, he was confident and charming. He dismissed the divorce as a private matter, a painful but separate issue from his professional life. "Sterling Innovations is stronger than ever," he declared, looking directly into the camera. "And our next product launch, Daedalus, will revolutionize the industry in the 4th quarter of this year. I can personally guarantee it." In the study at Oakwood, Arthur Vance watched the screen, and a slow, cold smile spread across his face. "He just lied," Arthur said quietly, "to millions of people. He just committed securities fraud on national television." Jessica Thorne was already on her phone, dialing her team. "Get a transcript of that interview. Every single word. We've got him." Richard thought he was fighting a war for public opinion. He was about to find out he was actually fighting for his freedom. The Sterling deception was beginning to unravel. Richard Sterling's television appearance was, by all public measures, a resounding success. The company's stock, which had been faltering, stabilized and even ticked up a percentage point. His confident pronouncements about Project Daedalus reassured nervous investors. He had weathered the initial storm of the divorce announcement and felt untouchable, cocooned within his fortress of wealth and legal protections. He celebrated that night by opening a $1,000 bottle of wine alone in his sterile mansion, believing he had outmaneuvered the old, slow-moving Arthur Vance. He was dangerously wrong. The interview was not the end of the matter. It was the ammunition Arthur's team had been waiting for. Jessica Thorne immediately filed a motion in family court. It was a masterful piece of legal maneuvering. She argued that Richard's public financial statements could no longer be trusted. She contended that by guaranteeing a product launch he knew was technologically unfeasible on the stated timeline, he had artificially inflated the value of the marital estate. Therefore, the prenuptial agreement, which was predicated on a full and honest disclosure of assets at the time of signing and during the marriage, was potentially voidable due to fraudulent misrepresentation. "He's not just misleading the market," Jessica argued before a skeptical judge. "He's misleading this court about the true, stable value of his holdings. We cannot have a fair and equitable division of what little marital property exists if one party is actively engaged in what amounts to a corporate shell game. We demand full discovery of all internal documents related to Project Daedalus." Richard's lawyers fought back furiously, calling the motion a baseless fishing expedition. But the seed of doubt had been planted. the judge intrigued by the audacity of the claim, and Jessica's compelling arguments did not grant full discovery, but approved a limited targeted inquiry into the Daedalus project's internal timeline and testing reports. It was the crack in the dam Arthur had been waiting for. Simultaneously, the fallout from Arthur's quiet phone calls began to cascade. Comstock Freight, the logistics giant, announced it was indefinitely postponing the integration of Sterling's Aura system, citing a need to reevaluate their technology partners in light of new information. The carefully worded press release never mentioned Richard's personal life, but everyone in the industry could read between the lines. The loss of a $100 million contract sent a shockwave through the tech community. Sterling Innovations stock dropped 7% in a single day. Panic began to set in within Richard's inner circle. His board members, who had previously been placated by his confidence, were now calling at all hours, demanding answers. The atmosphere inside the gleaming headquarters of Sterling Innovations turned from one of arrogant ambition to quiet paranoia. The pressure was most intense on one man, David Chen, the chief financial officer of Sterling Innovations. David was a brilliant but cautious accountant who had been with Richard from the early days. He was the architect of the company's financial models, but he was increasingly uncomfortable with the chasm between Richard's public promises and their internal reality. He knew the Daedalus hardware was a mess. He had argued with Richard in private, warning him that they were creating a massive liability. Richard had dismissed his concerns, blinded by his own hubris. "We sell the future, David," he'd said. "We'll make the present catch up later." David Chen was now in an impossible position. He was being asked to sign off on financial projections he knew were built on a lie. The court's new inquiry into Daedalus meant that his work would soon be under a legal microscope. He had a family, a reputation, and a professional license to protect. His loyalty to Richard was rapidly being eroded by his instinct for self-preservation. Arthur Vance, a master of understanding human motivation, suspected this. He didn't need to bug the company. He just needed to apply the right pressure and wait for the weakest link to break. Through a discreet third-party investigator, he had a message conveyed to David Chen. It was simple and unattributed. The first person to cooperate often gets the best deal. The message landed on fertile ground. That night, David Chen sat in his home office, staring at a spreadsheet that projected the launch of Daedalus. It was a work of fiction, a fantasy of numbers he had been ordered to create. He thought of the potential consequences: shareholder lawsuits, an SEC investigation professional, ruin, even prison. He then thought of the anonymous message. He made a decision. Using a prepaid burner phone, he placed a call to a number he had been given. Jessica Thorne answered. "This is David Chen," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm the CFO at Sterling Innovations. I believe I have information that will be of interest to you and Mr. Vance. I am willing to talk, but I will need assurances. Protection." It was the call the Vance team had been working towards for weeks. In a secret meeting arranged in a nondescript hotel conference room, David Chen laid everything bare. He brought with him a fireproof briefcase containing a hard drive. On it were the real internal R&D reports for Project Daedalus, a litany of failed tests, critical security flaws, and realistic timelines that projected a launch that was at least a year, possibly 2, behind Richard's public promises. But he had something more damning. "It's not just the timeline," David said, his face pale. "There's more. To cover the R&D budget overruns for Daedalus, Richard has been creative with our accounting." He explained the scheme. Richard had been capitalizing operational expenses, treating routine costs like marketing and software maintenance as long-term investments on the balance sheet. This practice, a serious violation of generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, made the company appear far more profitable than it actually was. It hid the ballooning costs of the failing Daedalus project and artificially inflated the company's net income quarter after quarter. This was the smoking gun. This wasn't just misleading investors. It was outright financial fraud. Richard Sterling hadn't just lied on television. He had built his entire empire on a foundation of lies. The deception ran to the very core of his company. Jessica Thorne looked at the documents David provided her expression, a mixture of disbelief and grim satisfaction. She knew she was holding a corporate death warrant. She immediately put in a call to her contact at the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. While Richard Sterling was busy with his lawyers trying to limit the scope of the family court's inquiry into Daedalus, a far more dangerous and powerful storm was gathering. He was so focused on the public battle with his wife that he never saw the corporate annihilation that was about to befall him. The cracks in his empire were no longer just visible. They were about to bring the entire structure crashing down. The setting was a family courtroom in San Mateo County, a place that usually dealt with custody disputes and asset divisions, not the intricate details of corporate fraud. Richard Sterling arrived with his legal team looking immaculate in a charcoal grey suit. He projected an air of weary confidence, the powerful CEO inconvenienced by a messy domestic affair. He believed his legal team had successfully contained the damage, limiting the Daedalus inquiry to a few heavily redacted documents. He was expecting a routine hearing to dismiss Jessica Thorne's frivolous motion. He was walking into an ambush. Evelyn sat beside Jessica, her quiet composure a stark contrast to Richard's arrogance. She looked directly at him, not with hatred or fear, but with a cool detachment that seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. Her father, Arthur Vance, was not in the courtroom. He had no need to be. His work was already done. The hearing began, and Richard's lead attorney argued forcefully that the Daedalus documents were trade secrets irrelevant to the divorce, and that their release would irreparably harm Sterling Innovations and its shareholders. Then it was Jessica Thorne's turn. She stood calm and collected and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, Mr. Sterling's counsel is correct about one thing. This is about more than just a product timeline. It is about a fundamental pattern of deception that goes to the very heart of this case and Mr. Sterling's credibility. And we have a witness who can speak directly to this deception." She turned to the back of the courtroom. The petitioner calls Mr. David Chen to the stand. A murmur went through the room. Richard Sterling's head snapped towards the entrance. His face went white as he saw his own chief financial officer, the man who knew all his secrets, walking purposefully toward the witness stand. The mask of calm shattered, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. His lawyers scrambled, objecting furiously, but the judge, her interest now intensely piqued, overruled them. "I want to hear what Mr. Chen has to say." For the next 2 hours under Jessica's precise and methodical questioning, David Chen calmly and clearly eviscerated Richard Sterling's empire. He testified about Project Daedalus, confirming that Richard knew the product was nowhere near ready and had deliberately misled the public and investors. He produced the internal reports which were entered into evidence, starkly contrasting with Richard's public statements. Then Jessica moved in for the kill. "Mr. Chen," she asked, her voice ringing with authority, "was this pattern of deception limited to the Daedalus project?" "No." David replied, his voice steady. "It was not." He then detailed the accounting fraud. He explained in simple terms for the court how Richard had ordered him to improperly capitalize operational expenses. He presented spreadsheets, the real ones, that showed how the company's reported profits were a fiction designed to hide massive cost overruns and prop up the stock price. So to be clear, Mr. Chen. Jessica summarized, Sterling Innovations was not as profitable as it claimed to be. That is correct, David said. It was in fact bleeding money. And Mr. Sterling was aware of this. He orchestrated it. Richard was visibly unraveling at the defendant's table. He was whispering furiously to his lawyers, his face slick with sweat. He had built his identity on the perception of being a flawless genius, a winner. And now, in a quiet family courtroom, his own CFO was methodically exposing him as a fraud and a liar. But Jessica wasn't finished. She had one final devastating blow to deliver. "Your Honor," she said, turning back to the judge, "this testimony is not only relevant to this case, demonstrating a clear pattern of fraudulent misrepresentation that should invalidate the prenuptial agreement, but it is also now a matter for another jurisdiction." As if on cue, the courtroom doors opened again. Two individuals in dark suits entered and stood at the back. They were not lawyers. Their badges identified them as agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission. A third person, a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who had received an anonymous tip, slipped in behind them. Richard's lawyer leaped to his feet. "Your Honor, what is the meaning of this? This is a private family matter." It stopped being a private matter, counsel, the judge said, her voice laced with ice, when your client allegedly began defrauding shareholders. It seems the consequences of Mr. Sterling's actions are no longer confined to this room. The full scale of the trap was now apparent. This was never just about the divorce. The family court was simply the stage Arthur Vance and Jessica Thorne had chosen for the public execution of Richard Sterling's career. They had used the court's discovery process to legally obtain the evidence and the testimony they needed, and then delivered it on a silver platter to the federal regulators. Jessica rested her case. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with the stench of corporate ruin. Richard Sterling sat slumped in his chair, a broken man. His wealth, his reputation, his company, all of it had been built on a lie, and it had all been torn down in the space of 2 hours. As the judge called a recess, the SEC agents approached the defense table. One of them spoke in a low, formal tone to Richard. "Mr. Sterling, we will need to speak with you." The reporter from the Wall Street Journal was already typing furiously into his phone, crafting the headline that would be on every terminal by morning: "Sterling Innovations, CEO accused of massive fraud in divorce court testimony. SEC launches investigation." Evelyn watched it all unfold, not with triumph, but with a profound and somber sense of justice. She felt no joy in his destruction, only a grim relief. The man who had terrorized her, who had struck her and called her unborn child a defect, was being unmasked before the world. As she stood to leave the courtroom, her hand resting on her stomach, she did not look back at the wreckage of the man she had once loved. She was looking forward to the future, to the new life she was now free to build for herself and her son. The gambit had worked. The king had been toppled. The aftermath of the courtroom hearing was swift and brutal. The Wall Street Journal story detonated a firestorm. Trading of Sterling Innovations stock was halted, but when it reopened the next day, it was a bloodbath. The share price plummeted by over 90% before trading was halted again. The company, once the darling of Silicon Valley, was effectively worthless. The board of directors, facing an SEC investigation and a tidal wave of shareholder lawsuits, convened an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to terminate Richard Sterling for cause. He was escorted from the building. He built a box of his personal effects in his hands, a pariah in the world that had once worshipped him. The legal battles ahead for him were immense: a federal investigation by the SEC, a likely criminal inquiry by the Department of Justice for securities fraud, and a litany of civil suits that would strip him of whatever remained of his personal fortune. The divorce, by comparison, became a footnote. With the prenuptial agreement rendered void by the evidence of his fraud, Richard's lawyers, recognizing the futility of a fight, quickly agreed to a settlement. Evelyn wanted nothing for herself, but insisted on establishing a substantial, untouchable trust fund for their son. The Atherton mansion, now a monument to a spectacular downfall, was sold to cover legal fees. 6 weeks later, in the quiet, peaceful environment of St. Jude's Hospital, the very place her old life had ended, Evelyn gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Nicholas Arthur Vance. She held him in her arms, marveling at his tiny fingers and the soft tuft of dark hair on his head. The pediatric cardiologist who came to check on him smiled. The small hole in his heart, the so-called defect that had triggered Richard's rage, was already beginning to close on its own, just as Dr. Peterson had predicted. He was in every way that mattered perfect. Arthur Vance was the first visitor. The formidable titan of industry melted at the sight of his grandson. He held the baby with a tenderness Evelyn had not seen in years, his eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, becoming soft with emotion. "He looks like you," Arthur said, quietly, his voice thick. "He has your strength," Evelyn replied, smiling. They didn't speak of Richard. There was no need. His name had evaporated from their lives, a ghost of a past that no longer held any power. In the months that followed, Evelyn discovered a strength and independence she never knew she possessed. She moved out of her father's estate and into a beautiful, comfortable home of her own, in a quiet neighborhood, a place filled with light and warmth, not cold glass and steel. She focused on being a mother, finding a deep, abiding joy in the simple rhythms of Nicholas's life. But she also felt a new sense of purpose. Her experience had opened her eyes to the hidden terror that many women face behind closed doors, often without the resources she was so fortunate to have. With her father's guidance and a significant portion of her settlement, she established the Vance Foundation for Women and Children. Its mission was to provide legal aid shelter and financial support for victims of domestic abuse, helping them escape and rebuild their lives. She became a passionate, articulate advocate, using her story not for pity, but to empower others. One sunny afternoon, about a year after Nicholas was born, Evelyn was in a park, pushing him on a swing. He was giggling, his little legs kicking with delight. Her phone buzzed. It was a news alert. Richard Sterling had just been sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. She read the headline, took a deep breath of the fresh, clean air, and then put the phone away. She felt nothing, not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. He was simply a chapter in her life that was now closed, a story that was over. The sound of her son's laughter was the only thing that mattered. Arthur Vance had once promised to take away the thing that defined Richard Sterling. He had succeeded. But in the process, Evelyn had found the one thing that would forever define her, not as a wife or a daughter or a victim, but as a mother, a survivor and a beacon of hope for others. The sun was warm on her face. Her son was laughing, and for the first time in a very long time, she was completely and utterly free. Evelyn's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't found in a stock portfolio or a magazine's cover, but in the courage to walk away from a life that is breaking you. It's about the fierce, protective love of a father and the incredible resilience of a woman who turned her deepest pain into her greatest purpose. Richard Sterling lost an empire built on lies, but Evelyn Vance built a new world for herself, and her son founded on truth, courage, and compassion. Her journey from a gilded cage to a life of freedom and advocacy shows us that even after the most devastating storms, a new dawn is always possible. If you were moved by Evelyn's fight for justice and her new beginning, please show your support. Hit that like button to let us know this story resonated with you. Share it with someone who needs to hear a story of resilience. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into stories that matter. Your support helps us bring more compelling narratives like this to light. Thank you for listening.